Now we have almost 150 now. I think people will continue to join.
Gradually,
And
yeah.
okay, sir.
Gradually they
I
are
think,
started
yeah.
joining.
Abhishek, can you unshare so that I can share my screen?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our second edition on complying to pacifier product, pacifier systems, and various subjects that we are covering. Today's topic is complying to Indian standards for fire safety. We have a very distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. K.C. Wadhwa. Just with one call, I told him, sir, your presence and your blessing will inspire all of us. So he has accepted, though he is traveling and he has taken time off and he is attending. We are blessed to have him as such a senior person in this program. And another person is a very familiar face in India is Abhishek Chabra. So we are going to have the next webinar, the third series going to come up on 8th April at 4 p.m. So we're going to talk about implementation and maintenance of pacifier systems. So it's a very interesting subject that everybody should know because everybody have a pacifier system, but how much do you know how to maintain those? So that will be the topic of the next series. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. K.C. Wadhwa, convener of the BAS committee, OS, and associate director, DRDO, Ministry of Defense, Delhi. Mr. Wadhwa has undergone different regular training programs, courses in the field of fire safety from UK, USA, Singapore, and South Korea. He is a member of Indian expedition team to Antarctica to advise on fire safety arrangement for Indian station called Maitri. He is currently working as associate director at Center of Fire, Explosive and Environment Safety, DRDO, Ministry of Defense, Delhi. And also looking after all the functions as fire advisor to Ministry of Defense in addition to various other training and research activity related to fire safety, explosive fire safety and disaster management. He presented and published more than 25 technical papers on fire safety and related topics in national and international conferences, seminar, workshops. He has also delivered lecture to IAS, IPS, IFS officers at National Police Academy, NPA at Hyderabad, senior officers at National Intelligence Bureau Academy, New Delhi, senior officers at National Institute of Criminology and Forensic Science in New Delhi under the Ministry of Home Affairs. I welcome Dr. K.C. Wadhwa to this program. Our subject speaker is Abhishek Chabra, the familiar face in India. He has been advocating the need for compliance to standard for improved safety and quality across industries for most of the last 2 decades. He has vast experience of promoting conformity assessment in several industries, including consumer electronics, industrial, renewable, and building product across geographies and jurisdictions. He has worked on several standards and codes development initiatives, specifically with Bureau of Indian Standard, ASTM, UAE Fire, and Life Safety Code of Practices and Saudi Standard. He is a regular speaker at facade and fire safety conferences, workshops by Society of Fire Protection Engineer, insurance industry, and is often invited as a keynote speaker like New Zealand's Fire NZ conferences. He frequently writes article and magazine and publication on his note as does a large-scale fire propagation test ensure fire safe cladding? was published in the Council of Tall Building and Urban Habitat called CTBUH. Since the pandemic hit the world, he has been regularly delivering free education, webinars increasing the awareness about conformity mechanism for fire safety, more specifically for passive fire protection, as well as Saudi building. He has joined Thomas Wheelwright International Consultant in 2013 and has been the driving force behind the expansion of the fire compliance activities into new markets. His valuable experience from the other larger testing, inspection, and certification companies has helped customers and construction industry stakeholders over the year. Along with helping certification body expand their horizon of business, he also owns and drives a blog and LinkedIn group called Gurus of Testing, Inspection and Certification. For everybody's information, the website is www.TIC Guru, aimed at expanding the understanding of conformity across the world. These are the two gentlemen today going to enlighten us on the standards and the what's happening across the globe. I now welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. K.C. Wadhwa, to give his comment.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction. But at the outset, my due apology that I'll not be able to join. My visuals are not there because I'm traveling actually. I'm not stationed at a particular place. So that's the reason I thought I will definitely participate. And I thank Mr. Dominic and Mr. Chabra for giving me an opportunity to be a part of it, to be a keynote speaker in this particular interaction. Like we say that our topic has been, I think, selected very nicely, that complying to the Indian standard for fire safety. Because as and when we think of any fire safety standards, the basic focus is, the fire safety standard focuses on preventing the initiation of fire when we establishing, say, performance-based norms. So we say if these are adhered to, that improve the fire safety of the materials as well as the products. And when we say that the fire safety standards, how effective they are. So the effectiveness is always illustrated by seeing the declining trends in the fire incidents in the country. Because as we all know that if you see the statistics of our country, we see that every day there are 62 casualties within India. If we see the National Crime Record Bureau reports, a lot of fire incidents take place in our country. Few are reported, few are not reported. I think idea behind is that whatever standards we have, things are in place. Only lacuna is its compliance, the standards compliance. And we have globally also, there are many standards across the world. They are for just about every situation, whether it is building or construction related area. A multiplicity of the approaches and the codes has created total uncertainty and the confusion in the testing and approval of the construction methods or their products or operation of buildings. So these are, and then we have some international fire safety standards coalition also. This coalition was launched in 2018. I was going through one of the literature. They say that there are 80 fire safety leadership organizations who have joined hands, to have the international fire safety standards. And they are attempting to bring some order to the fire safety standard in the building and construction sector. And moreover, there is another setup, International Electronics Commission and UL. They have been effective in setting those standards for electrical and electronic equipment. So we do have international standards, and there are various, we all know as professionals that Australia has their own Australian standards, and then we have VDS. So many standards are there, FMUL, these labs are there, and international standards are too many. But in our country, as we know that BIS is the national standard body, and which was established under the BIS Act. And then we saw that this is the statutory body who is responsible for development of codes, standards, marking and quality certification of goods, etc. And we know that in the area of fire safety, BIS has formulated more than 150 standards, which are related to the building, the firefighting equipment, and the firefighting system. And as we know that the outbreak of fire not only becomes the reason for the loss of precious lives, but also inflicts massive property losses. In order to circumvent from the harsh impacts of the fire, one needs to comply the fire safety rules, standards which are issued by the government agency. And then complying to the Indian standard for the fire safety equipment, appliances or systems, this calls for the stringent inspection procedures. That's another area that things are in place, but when we say that when we are carrying out the inspection, if not stringently done, then again, there's a lacuna left, there are loopholes left, which may again lead to any kind of incident or ultimately may lead to some disaster. So there's a need to have stringent acceptance test procedures and state-of-the-art test and evaluation facilities set up within the country, because every standard needs to have some kind of R&D and test evaluation facility to be set up within the country. As we all know that in the fire safety area, it's a niche area, I should say, because any standard what we have, for example, I tell you that we are buying fire suits, but we don't have a proper lab within the country which is able to test the fire entry suit within the country. So, which means, or for that matter, fire proximity suits. All the state fire services, they are buying these suits on the basis of the certification issued from abroad. So there's a need to have the test and evaluation facility within the country. Those are another requirements within the country. And in the Asian sector, Asian belt, Asia Fire Inspection Council, they had taken some initiative, because I happened to visit 2 times to South Korea, where I had a very lengthy interaction with the Asian Fire Inspection Council. So they also took an initiative to formulate some Asian standards on fire safety, and they constituted also various committees long back, in 2007. And that committee, but till now nothing has happened so far as Asian standards are concerned, because their concern was also that why should we follow all the time a UL standard or FM standard or any other British standard? Why not we have Asian standards within our this thing? Because there's a formation of group here where I represent India actually. So we have meeting every 2 years, once in 2 years. So I happened to visit once in 2007, another was in 2019. So where we deliberated for a week there, very lengthy deliberations. I could visit their test and evaluation lab, fire safety lab there in South Korea, to set up some facilities which are not existing within this. And we also at CFE, Center for Fire, Explosive and Environment Safety, we are the regulatory authority for the Ministry of Defense in the area of fire safety and explosive safety, which means every setup which is coming up within the Ministry of Defense, whether it is Army, Navy, Air Force, Ordnance Secretary or DRDO, they have to obtain clearance from us before they go for the occupation or the construction of those facilities. So we have set up recently our test and evaluation facility at Pilukwa Skill Development Center, which is 24 acres center, and which was inaugurated by the Honorable Raksha Mantri on 22nd of February 2021, which is at Pilukwa. It is around 50 kilometer from Delhi, a part of UP, Uttar Pradesh. And we also had, very big test and evaluation setup we have erected there, where for the first time in the country, we are going to set up the test and evaluation facility. This is fire test and mannequin. We have purchased a mannequin facility where we'll be testing all the fire suits in the actual fire conditions, and we'll be issuing the certificate. The certification will be done. This is primarily meant for the Ministry of Defense. However, we'll be extending this facility to the civil sector also in times to come. And as we know that, while we are formulating our Indian standard, uh, we are adopting most of the ISO standards also on various fire safety areas, be it the systems or equipment or appliances, etc. So wherever we don't have Indian standard, we fall back, we do the adoption, and keeping in view our local conditions, the ISO standards we adopt, and then accordingly we have our Indian standard based on that. Now there's a need, to have this formation of consortium. I should say that there's a need to have formation of consortium involving different agencies from the government or private or NGOs to ensure the compliance of these standards and conducting of third-party fire safety audit or reviews or inspections, so that we have the standard which are at par with any other international standard. So with this small brief, I now call upon the speaker who will be giving more insight on the compliance of the Indian standards for the fire safety. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the wonderful recommendations, suggestions, and guidance to us. And we are recording your commentary on this, and this same will be shared to all those people who are attending. And thank you very much, sir, and be safe and drive safe. And I hope that you will continue to listen to Mr. Abhishek Chhabra. So I now request Abhishek to touch upon those topics that we've been talking, and the entire country is very excited to listen to it.
Thank you very much. Namaskar and a big hello to everybody. And many thanks to Wadhwaji for setting the tone for today's very fantastic set of slides that I think I have kind of put together. And one of the things that Wadhwaji mentioned was the 85 company association, which is IFSS. And we are very happy and lucky to be part of IFSS, the International Federation. And I am one of the key members there who have recently declared the decade of fire safety this decade, and a lot of so-called action and thoughts being put in that direction. Today, I will address something which is very close to my heart. As a person, I am very motivated and excited about something called compliance and conformity. And Wadhwaji also mentioned about Indian standards, and today's session is specific to this subject. And I must say, almost as a disclaimer, as at the beginning, that almost all aspects of my today's session are all centered around passive fire protection. So if I am talking about standards, compliance, and processes, even though these are very generic concepts which are applicable to every industry, some of the things are very specific to passive fire protection. And I very strongly feel that passive fire protection needs a little more weightage and understanding, as something which Dominic has very rightly said, that we are talking of a means of fire protection, a means of fire safety, which does not require water or electricity. And even if something takes a little long time to react, like a smoke detector or alarm system, here is a system which functions in its place. So I'm going to hence talk about, I think there are some people in the audience who wanted a copy to the previous workshop that we did. The previous workshop very specifically introduced and talked about passive fire protection to all those people who may not be very, very familiar with what passive fire protection is and how compliance is very, very important. And whenever we talk about compliance, there is always a discussion about standards. Wadhwa ji was also mentioning, we were talking of FM or UL standards. So I thought I'm going to start today's workshop with taking a very simple approach to explaining, first of all, what is a standard. And there are many kinds of standards, but I must begin by explaining that a standard is best described by a word called consensus. A standard is a consensus document, which means a group of people, a group of professionals who come together and they agree in a standard method, standard way of doing certain things. This could be measurement, this could be specification, this could be testing, this could be how to do something, which means how to erect a building, how to set up plumbing. So there are many things which are all grouped under standard. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 of these, and these 3 are not only going to be referred very, very specifically in today's session, but these 3 are used by almost all of you at some or the other point of time as part of your jobs probably. So I want to take some time to explain to you how these groupings provide the weightage and a correct understanding and interpretation of things. A code of practice, something which is very well exposed to some of you as the National Building Code of India or any other code, is something which is a document, a standard, which defines good practice, which is currently undertaken by competent and conscientious practitioners of an activity. This activity could be building, and hence we have something called a building code. And we must know and understand that this is a document which is a consensus document by a set of people. So you could have many building codes like the International Building Code from United States and so many building codes that exist. So where a building code comes from, it is a recommended sound good practice. There could be instances where that concept like building is beyond the definition of what the building code is, and hence those good practices should be used in intent and as a baseline. We then talk of something called a method or a standard method. A standard method is very, very prescriptive. It is very, very specific. It talks about an agreed way, again, consensus, an agreed way of either measuring or testing or specifying something which is reliably repeatable. Very important to know and understand that whenever we are talking of a method, a standard method, the core is about repeatability, which means if we are measuring something, if we are specifying something, if we are testing something, this act of testing, of specifying, of measurement should be done exactly in the same way every time the standard method is followed. And how it is followed, we will talk about today. But first of all, this is a standard method, and this is different from a code. In continuation, I talk about another type of standard, which is often called as guide. We have a lot of guideline documents, which is a consensus document. So a guide is less prescriptive. It gives an overview advice, which again reflects the current thinking and practice amongst a particular subject. So we are talking about a guide, and this is different standard as compared to what is a code or what is a method. So if there are any questions, please type them in the question and answer session throughout the course of the slides, which is specific about what I am talking about, and I will definitely address this. And I hope I'm making these parts of the slide clear for all the listeners. So with this as a background, let's move to India and something which is very, very specific to India. In India, whenever we talk about standards, everybody would understand and recall Bureau of Indian Standards, or BIS. And BIS, or Bureau of Indian Standard, has a very, very long and a very interesting history. I picked up some things today from our website. And the reason why I bring this out is basically to make the listeners understand that the Bureau of Indian Standards, which became the national standardization body under an BIS Act in 2016, as per the company's website, would have and has been involved in standardization as a process for a very, very long time. Currently, it undertakes several activities, which you can see on the left of your screen, starting with what is called standard formulation. Some of you may have noticed that it is uncommon nowadays for people to say standard writing body. These bodies are called standard development organizations because they provide a platform for a consensus to be arrived and then published. And hence, a standard is published by a standard development organization. And I want to be very clear because we are going to very soon, after some slides, talk in a greater detail about how standards come to be, who can write standards or publish standards. But here, I must share that our Indian Bureau of Standards, or Bureau of Indian Standards, also runs conformity programs or certification programs. A closest example I can think of is UL, or Underwriters Laboratories, a fantastic organization, a lot of good friends and memories, is a standard development authority, or an SDO, which is UL standards. The group under UL, which publishes standards, and the company has another unit, which is UL, which is into conformity assessment services or certification or compliance. Very, very similar, in fact, in a way, to the Bureau of Indian Standards, who also run some certification programs, specifically the country's mandatory and regulatory as well as voluntary compliance schemes. And I will talk about that in a minute. But let's come back to understand the role of BIS in standard development processes. I'm happy to share, and you would probably know that many people from India, through the eyes and ears of Bureau of Indian Standards, are also participating in the standard development processes of ISO, which is the International Standardization Organization, and IEC, which is the International Electrotechnic Committee, who publish a very large number of standards. And the reason why I talk about this is that on the screen, some of the international committees of ISO, where people from India are taking an active part in ensuring and maneuvering the current state of the standards which are run under these committees. And it is something to feel very, very proud about. but I want to drill a little deeper into the standardization process. What you see on your screen are some of the committees of Bureau of Indian Standards, which are members of the specific committees under ISO who are developing standards for fire safety. Some very specific to my favorite subject of passive fire protection. And I want to share this screen specifically with all the people, because anybody who has logged in today has some or the other interest or intent in fire safety in India. And you will notice that for all these committees who are driving the standards at an international level for fire safety, people in India through BIS are currently only in observer status. So when it comes to matters of fire safety, I call upon all the attendees, if there are attendees in the audience, who feel that they can contribute to the development of better consensus or better way of doing things. This could be specifying, testing, measuring, code of practice guides. There are so many types of standards. Please reach out to BIS and become more active in these international committees so that we learn how to create and develop standards in some segment where standardization is missing in India. And hence, I will move to a understanding of who are these technical committees who write standards, and where do these technical committees really originate from? How can we write a standard? A simple question, right? So if you see on the right, there is a list of companies I found on a certain website on the internet. These are typically associations or technical bodies which are in India, and there are hundreds of such technical associations and bodies which are present in India. These bodies provide a platform for a consensus to be arrived at. Consensus for what? Consensus for anything which can lead to a standard. And this could be a testing standard, a specification standard, a measurement standard. And I want to bring out a very specific example of a body like this called CCPS, which is the Confederation of Construction Products and Services. I have taken this without any permission from CCPS, so I'm sorry for that. But I remember having a very, very good meeting in the head office of CCPS about 10 years ago with Mr. Gahlot and many people who are part of CCPS. So why do I talk about CCPS? For people who are not aware, they undertake lots of things. And on the left of your screen, you will see a snapshot of some of the things that they have been undertaking in the last 10, 20 years, probably. And if you read out, or if you can read out, the font is very, very small. It talks about glass and glazing standardization, hardware guidelines, doors and window standardization. And the reason I bring this about is because here is an association who have published certain guides, certain standards. These are not standards which have yet been adopted or published under the Bureau of Indian Standards umbrella. But these are standards because they are published through a consensus of a group of people. And when they are a consensus-led document, these documents can then be referred into technical regulations, into contracts, into specifications. On your screen, you see an image of one such adoption. So here is a letter from CPWD, the Central Public Works Department, which is actually referring to one of the standard that has been published by CCPS. So here is a very classic example of how a consensus among a certain set of people who may or may not be the national standardization body of the country is then becoming a baseline to agreeing at how certain things should be done. So this document, I think, is it's from CPWD, and many states and many such authorities and bodies not only have adopted documents from CCPS as an example, they have adopted standards from a very large number of standard development organizations, which means you could have a procurement document by a government entity, a semi-government entity, a ministry, or at a state level, which could reference a standard written by FM, a standard written by UL, a standard published, or a standard published by BSI, ASTM, or a standard published by one of hundreds of technical associations or bodies inside India. So this I wanted to talk about to set a base as to where do standards really come from? What do standards really do? What is the function of a standard? The function of a standard is to arrive at a consensus of doing things, of measuring things, of specifying things, so that there is what you and me call standardization, which means there is a minimum level that has been set of doing something. And hence, I will now move to the next part, which is I want to talk today about, I would like to talk about all Indian standards, but I have picked up 2 Indian standards. And these 2 Indian standards are relatively new. And these 2 Indian standards are part of the 10 Indian standards that we as an international laboratory and a certification body have worked hard for the last 3 years. And we are now offering testing as well as certification and listing, just like an international certification body like UL or FM or Warrington would offer as a listing for compliance to these standards. So let's take a deeper look at these 2 standards, what they are. I would encourage anybody who is in the audience to drop a line in the chat of anybody who has either been involved in this fantastic development of standards or know anything more about it. I would love to interact and deal with you. Anybody in the audience who is familiar with these standards, please do give me a shout. I know there are some manufacturers who are logged in who I know. So here we go. What are these 2 standards? I'm going to talk in parallel for some slides. The IS 3614 is a standard which is not 3614 part 1 or part 2. This is the latest standard which is being pushed out and published by the BIS in 2021, very fresh, last year. And what this standard is, it is not a testing standard. This standard is a specification standard. For people who have been attentive and heard the difference in the beginning, this is a standard, which is a specification standard, which means that there has been a consensus among all the people who were involved in publishing the standard in how a fire door should get specified at a national level in India. Hence, this is a specification standard. If I were to read some parts of what is written in the scope, it says that this standard lays down quality requirements, including requirements regarding materials and details of construction of fire-rated metal swing doors, wooden composite swing doors, metal sliding doors, metal rolling shutters, etc., etc., and it goes on. And I must share my personal view, not the company's view about this, that whenever we talk about a product specification standard, while it sets the minimum norm of how a certain type of product exists, it also in some ways limits the way a certain type of product can be designed or built. Because if you set a standard on how to make a product, then everybody will have to make the product exactly in the same way. Moving forward, and in parallel, we talk about another standard, which is the IS 16945. These are two standards where a lot of hard work has been put in the last few years by many people who I do know. And I'd love to see hands or messages from people who have been involved in either the IS 16945 or the IS 16947. Now, these standards are not specification standards. These standards, as the title says, it is fire resistance test for glass walls, which means this standard prescribes a method of testing to determine the fire resistance criteria of both load-bearing and non-load-bearing glass walls. So these two are different standards. One of the standard is a specification standard, which means it defines in a function in a way what a fire door in India is, defining in a greater detail of what all types of fire door this standard is talking about. The other is a test method. I hope this is kind of clear, because we will later and towards other parts of this session, we will talk about compliance, because the aim is to have a product which functions as a passive fire protection product. How do these standards help in that? Let us look how the standardization process helps. Now, I'm not probably going to read into all the details on the screen, but anybody who may not be very familiar with these standards or is not aware of these standards can also read through what is the major changes that happened in the IS 3614, because this recording will be available later. And for all the people who have been talking about getting a copy of the standard, I must be the voice of BIS to say that BIS has done a fantastic job, not only publishing many standards, but a very large number of standards they have made available for free. So you go to the BIS website, you traverse through the website, and standards like the 3614 for fire door specifications, or the 16945 and 947, and several other standards which have been indigenously published. These standards are freely available for people to download. And I think the function of Google should be effectively used to search where you can get a copy of these standards. But I would encourage all the people who are interested in standardization to do so. Moving to the fire resistance test of glass walls. And here I want to bring about a link which a lot of people want to always figure out. Is an Indian standard or an international standard, which one sits where? And I want to bring this comparison for a lot of people. Because people in India and we did not choose to reinvent the wheel, the fire resistance test for glass walls specifically refers to 4 international standards, one of which is an ISO standard and 3 of them which are European standards, who have given guidance in evolving and realizing how this testing should be done. This does not mean that this Indian standard is a copy-paste of the international standard. There would be and should be localizations involved. but some aspects of the standardization are same or similar to an international standard, and I will show you how this is to be. Here again, on the left side of your screens, you will see the fire door specification standard, the 3614. And it talks about a certain clause in this specification standard, which defines how to determine the fire resistance of the fire door. Which means as a standard specification, it defines that if you want to evaluate the fire resistance of a fire door, you refer to the ISO 3008-1 as a method of doing fire resistance test. And very interestingly, this ISO 3008-1 points to again another ISO standard, which is 834-1, for defining several aspects of it. One such aspect is what is called the time temperature curve, or something which I explained in the previous session, or it is a means by which the testing laboratory recreates a fully developed fire in a furnace. So people who are seeing their screen carefully and see this small inset box, you will notice that this is exactly the same as how the time temperature curve is defined in the testing standard, or the Indian testing standard, which is IS 16945 for glazing, which means one of the key aspects of conducting the test in this Indian standard is the same as the international standards. So I'm going to give a slightly bigger insight to this. What you see on your screen looks like very, very technical. This is something which is called a time temperature curve, which means on the left side is temperatures, and on the bottom you can see the time, which means that the test equipment, which is a furnace, the rate in time at which the temperature inside the furnace will increase. So you see the blue and the purple and the red lines talk about two internationally used time temperature curves. There is one which is the European, British, or the ISO time temperature curve, represented by purple or blue, whatever is the color you can get to see on your screen. And the other is the American, which is ASTM, UL, NFPA, etc. And you would notice that they are very, very similar. They are not exactly the same. So one of the several criterias, there are many, many other criterias: pressure, type of measuring equipment, thermocouples, and several other aspects where many of these standards vary heavily, and I cannot really go into all of that detail today in this session. But I must share that some of the key tenets of testing are very, very similar. Now, with this understanding of testing and standards and how the standards get linked, developed, I want to bring about the most important aspect of why these standards were created, because we want to ensure certain products, certain systems, certain installations, certain measurement is exactly the same. Let's look at how the regulatory framework in our country drives this, either at a country level or at a state level or a jurisdiction level. There are a very large number of technical regulations that are followed in the country, starting with the National Building Code, but there are many, many projects in the built environment that could refer to either an NFPA code or an IBC code, or many semi-government bodies like the Airport Authorities of India or the Indian Railways or the Oil Ministry, CPWD, etc., 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 would have their own documents in place. And hence, it is important to know and understand that these documents can point to anything which can be called a standard. It could be a procurement document, for example, written by Airport Authority of India. It is an internal document, and that document is also called a standard when it is referred to in a bid or a RFP or a contract. The same goes for any other entity writing a requirement. They could point to an international standard, an Indian standard, wherever the consensus is agreed to at. I would then like to talk about regulation. And many thanks to an initiative by FM in India of forming a body called FLFPI. Please Google for more. They did a research and published a state-wise fire act, which means that in our country, in India, fire safety is not a central subject. Each state have their own fire laws, and very unfortunately, many states do not have any fire law. The ones that are published by FLFPI, they have links on the website, are these 11 odd states that you see on the screen. So these have some act, they have a technical regulation on matters related to fire safety, which may be probably just fire pumps or sprinklers or something of that sort. But as far as I know, there is no requirement mandated yet in India about passive fire protection. So my knowledge is limited. I would urge and request the listeners, if anybody knows more, that maybe in the Fire Act in Tamil Nadu or in Uttar Pradesh or in West Bengal, there is a technical compliance requirement to a compliance testing method. And of course, all of us would love to see Indian standards here. The same goes for public procurement guides or contracts. Now, let's move to compliance. How do you check that a product is actually complying to a standard? So when we talk about product compliance, like fire doors or anything, there is currently no country level conformity assessment program by BIS, which is running and functioning at this time, which can certify or check the compliance of a passive fire product. We could have laboratories who are testing these products to an international standard or to an Indian standard. But testing, as a testing laboratory, has a very, very different view, and I'll come to that in the next slide. But there are many private certification players like FM, UL, Intertech, Warrington, and many, many others, Thomas Bellwright included, which offer compliance to international standard. So many people who want good compliance, they would say that I need a FM pump or a UL pump or something which is certified by an international company. So let's look at where and how conformity assessment is actually needed to make sure assurance happens correctly on the ground. And we talk of three aspects. Who is manufacturing, which means where is it that the product repeatability has to come? Who is installing? Are they installing it correctly or not? And who is really liable? If something goes wrong, who will pay the money? So I want to talk about here that testing, which is done by many, many laboratories, is a very tiny aspect of compliance. Many people ask us, when are you setting up a lab in India? And I always tell them that most of my customers, manufacturers, would like to test the minimum number of times. They don't want to test over and over again. And this is the reason why certification and listing, which is a method by which we check and ensure at the factory by regularly auditing them, that the product which is going to the construction site is exactly the same as it was tested. Because a test report talks about two aspects. It talks about capability, which means can a product be produced and tested to comply to a given standard? Because a test method is recreating testing scenario repeatedly. But is the product complying to that test method? Maybe, and you get a test report for it. But that test report only shows that the way what we call a golden sample was installed in the lab, very well, passed. It does not say how many times it failed in the past, and it sometimes only links with how it was manufactured in the factory. So it is impossible for a fire testing laboratory, not a certification body, but a laboratory, to certify how they are manufacturing the product in their factory. And this is very, very important as a point for listeners to know and understand. Because for so many products, which you can see scroll up and down on the right side of the screen, which are manufactured either inside the country or in an overseas plant, they could all go to a laboratory and get a product tested from a lab which is very good. They are accredited internationally or whichever way. But the question you need to ask is that, is testing alone a means of compliance that you can rely on? What is coming to the construction site, is it the same or not? So while you can test a product to any of the standards, whether they are Indian or international, it is critical to know and understand that the assessment of conformity to a standard is being achieved when the product reaches the construction site. How does international compliance work? I know this is going a little long, maybe Dominic is nodding his head, but I must share, instead of internationally, at least in the UAE, how stringent it has become now. So the building code, or the fire and life safety code, A, points to a long list of test methods and categorically says that whenever the latest revision of the standard is published, the building code will not have to change. Whatever is current has to be used. But it goes down to not only defining the responsibilities of each stakeholder, it uses an ISO standard 17065. I remember someone asked about this standard at the beginning in the chat. This is a standard which defines how certification should operate. And the fire and life safety code goes to an extent to explaining which stringency level of the certification program or the assessment program is mandated, which means there has to be sampling done before the product goes to the lab. And then there has to be a detailed audit regularly at the factory to make sure that the same product, how it was manufactured, which was tested, is being produced over and over again. And then the manufacturer needs to have a commercial liability. Who is the commercial entity who can be fined, taken to court if something goes wrong? So the proof of conformity of a product can be checked in so many ways. For each construction project, you could send all these passive fire products into a lab over and over and over again. Or you could rely on a known published evidence sitting on the directory of a certification body to check where is the product coming from, what is on the label. Yes, there is proof and there is a third party sitting and checking whether this is being done correctly or not. This could be for fire doors, this could be for partitions, this could be for so many different products. And I cannot emphasize more on this very evolved measurement or very evolved method of conformity assessment, which really does not require everybody to test the product over and over again, spend 5-6 lakh rupees every time. Why? There is a means of compliance which is available, and it is so much easier because it is like a buyer's guide. A fire consultant, a procurer, a contractor can go to the buyer's guide and see, oh, here is a manufacturer who complies to the UL 10C standard or so-and-so standard. And here is a third-party body who is ensuring that they are going to the factory over and over and again, which means I have two people to take to court if the product that reaches my construction site is complying or not complying. And the very, very best part of this certification conformity program is that all details are available for someone to go and inspect the product at site and check whether they are true or not. And we, as I said, are very excited that we are probably the only international certification body in the whole world that is now offering these compliances to 10 Indian standards, most of them which are part of the National Building Code of India. So as a certification mechanism, which, mind you, can be inspected at the construction site. And inspection is very, very important. Cannot tell you more about how important it is to check what you buy, check what is getting installed. Because if it is not getting installed correctly, then what is the purpose? Here is a classic scene on our certification program. This is an aluminum composite panel manufacturer. And at the construction site, you can remove a panel, go to the back side of the panel, look at the certification number. You can search this certification number and very quickly see the live certificate document, which will tell you where the product is manufactured, what is it complying to, what does it look like. And in case there is a difference, then you can always go back to the contractor and say, hey, what did you do? And you need a qualified inspection body who is accredited to be able to check all of this. That's towards the end of my session. For people who do not know us, we are a 27-year-old body based out of Dubai. We have offices in the UK, in Saudi, in lots of parts of the world, in Qatar. We have a presence in India, we have presence in Egypt, and we have been heavily involved in fire testing over the last 15 years, ranging from small scale tests for materials, resistance to fire tests. We have 4 large furnaces. We do a considerable number of tests on fire propagation for cladding. And probably in terms of the spread and scope of work, we are probably the largest fire testing laboratory, which is used heavily by international certification bodies like UL, Intertek, FM, Warrington, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm going to open the panel for questions. I'm going to try and search the Q&A today, and on your screens you can copy my email address, my phone number. You also have the phone number and email address of my colleague who is based in Mumbai now and is available as a local point of contact for anything to do with fire compliance from Thomas Bell Wright. I hope that was not too long, Dominic.
Abhishek, thank you so much. We are also blessed to have, there are a couple of people who are part of the standard development, like we have B.S.N. Narayan and Mr. V. Suresh and a couple of more people. They are here today as a participants, and they've been listening to us. And I wanted to thank both B.S.N. Narayan and V. Suresh. Played a very important role in building up standards, BIS standards, and also the National Building Code. So I will, once the question and answer is over, probably I will invite them to say a few words. So B.S.N. Narayan, if is there, I will allow you to speak after a couple of questions that we take. And Mr. V. Suresh also, I'd love to have him on the screen later. Over to Abhishek, please go ahead.
So while I urge everybody to please write the questions in the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom. I think there were lots of questions that were probably coming in the chat, and the chat screen has really scrolled up. I may not be able to address to them. So please go ahead, and I welcome you to write in the questions in the question and answer session. I will read some of the questions, and then in case I'm not able to answer, I will say no. So let me pick up a question by the first question, which is Narasingha Rao Pujari. who has probably asked two questions. What are the precautions to be taken to avoid the propagation of fire in the cable duct from one floor to another floor in a multi-story building? Great question, sir. As always, this is fantastic. You need to make sure that the duct is fire rated in case the building code being followed in the project is a European or probably an Indian code. The American codes do not call for fire rated ducts, but the other aspect which is very, very important is to make sure that the fire stopping and the through penetration is not only certified and listed, but it is installed by a certified installer and inspected by a certified installer, because it is very, very important that the installation is done correctly. The next question from Narasingha Rao is talking about Indian standard for the construction of soak pit to drain the oil from a transformer. I am very sorry, sir. This is not an area of my expertise. I call it out of syllabus question. I'm sorry, I cannot answer this. Moving to how can visual cues affect fire safety? Akash Shinde, I would want you to please clarify this question. I am not able to understand what visual cues are we talking about. Vishal Singh is talking about,
since I'm here.
Vishal Singh is talking about indoors. What is fire resistance door and what is a fire check door? Fire resistance door is a door which can contain a fire. Please refer to the first session that we did. Milind Dange wants to know something about fire extinguishers. They are active fire. I will not be talking about that, sir. So Arun K, I don't know who Arun K is. There are so many Arun Ks that I know of. What are the codes and standards applicable for construction industry under construction buildings, IT parks / commercial buildings? Well, there are lots of codes you can refer to, Arunji. There is IBC, which talks about IT parks, and within the building code, there are specific requirements for different types of occupancies. The IBC and the NFPA codes are usually very, very thorough if you want to set some baseline requirements. Jitendra wants to know, how do we identify a type of standard, whether it is a code, method, or a guide? Jitendra, it's very easy. Go back to the recording and the slide that I talked about. I talked this about that what is a code and what is a standard. It only talks about what are we talking as a consensus. It is a method, then we are talking of repeatability of method. If it is a guide or a code, it's usually very easy to distinguish if you see this sheet.
Hello, Mr. Abhishek.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Narayan, BSA Narayan.
Hi, how are you, sir? Very good to see you.
My name is BS Ashwath Narayan, known in the industry as BSA Narayan. Actually, I'm also involved in formulation and then revisions of IS codes. Recently, we have done the sprinkler code where I am also there. And then we have also done, my specialization is plumbing and fire protection system. And we have recently come out with water efficiency standards for sanitary fixtures and chrome-plated fittings and China-ware fittings. Fixtures and fittings. And
I was very much involved with IAPMO India. I am aware of what you're talking of. Very good to connect, sir.
Actually, I just come out of IPA because otherwise I was a national vice president of Indian Plumbing Association and also one of the founders. And
you would probably remember me, sir. I was part of the signing when IAPMO did a MOU with Intertech to open a plumbing lab in India.
I remember.
I was there.
Oh yes,
I was part of that team to set up the lab, or did not set up. But tell me, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, and like also in the National Building Code, I'm the convener and chairman for Part 9, plumbing, water supply, drainage,
Very nice.
solid waste management, and gas system.
Fantastic.
So in India, in India also, the codes and standards are, I can say it is pretty well developing now, and it was there, but then it was, principally, or I can say predominantly, it was based on a lot of BS standards, but now the things are changed already. And a lot of codes we are revisiting and then rewriting, reformulating the codes and standards. Like sprinkler, it was an old standard what we used to have. Now we have revised the sprinkler standard, sprinkler system standards, and then lot of other, like even the smallest of the small, people will laugh. The cockroach traps. I'm started working on that cockroach traps. What will be the standard, and then how to formulate, and what is the, everything we are started. So
As
what
I said,
want to say is,
yes, sir.
there is, sorry.
Go ahead.
There is lot of things which is going on in India. Maybe most of the people may not be knowing this, but a lot of things are going on. And then the Bureau of Indian Standard, BIS, is now, earlier we used to go and buy a book and all those things. Now it is all available on, you can download the thing if you pay something, and certain time they allowed us to download free of cost. So lot of things are going on in India. And also when we started writing our, when we started writing the National Building Code, we had referred a lot of standards throughout the world. And then, of course, as you know, when I was interacting with IAPMO, they are the pioneers in codes and standard formulation in US. Around 80 years, since 80 years they are doing. And their Uniform Plumbing Code is one of the best codes which is followed by half of the world. So we have also taken a lot of inputs from them with, of course, a prior approval and all those things. And we have incorporated in our National Building Code some of the tabulations, which is really useful for the practical engineers. So those things has been incorporated and all. I just wanted to mention a few things about this.
Oh, okay, sure. I thought there was a question that you wanted to ask.
No. I just
very good to know this. Yes, absolutely, sir. As you now could have probably recalled me as one of the people with at that time with IAPMO and all the folks that were involved with Russ Cheney and the whole team.
Yes, IAPMO team was there. Sudhakaran Nair, myself, Ms. Nair, myself, and Russ Cheney, and the lady, I forgot. Okay, from
Megan Letonen. Yes.
Megan was there. Suresh Saab knows everything.
Yeah.
So I remember very well now.
Very nice to hear your voice, Suresh ji.
I'm here. Full presentation. I did not want to stop the flow of presentation, so it's gone on well.
Thank you, sir.
Please continue. I'll chip in at the end.
Perfect. Let me just finish off some of the questions. I think some of the attendees are
I'll chip in at the end.
Yeah. So I'm going to take up these questions. Ashok Babu wants to know where to get NFPA and BSI papers on fire safety, sir. They're all over the internet. But I must say that British Standards Institute and NFPA and many such standard development organizations are all private organizations. They sell some of the work that they have done. So BSI documents, you may be able to get some for free, but some you will have to pay. Murtuza Shahbaz says that, can you please speak about passive fire protection compartment methodology? Murtuza, it's a whole session was conducted last time. We did a full 1-hour webinar on passive fire protection and compartmentalization. And Dominic would send you the link. You can listen to the whole session online. Timothy wants to know, is there any certification course on building fire protection system and standardization? Sorry, Tim, I'm not aware of any such course. Milind Dange wants to know what type of color should be used for fire door. Anything can be used. There is no restriction on that as long as it is tested and it is complying. Color has got nothing to do with fire resistance, even though color has lots to do with the reaction to fire, which is ignitability and combustibility. But for fire doors, doesn't come into play. Ramakant, the question of fire door proof of conformity of quality is still very much lagging in India. I agree. Do any agencies prevail in India who can assist us in delivery of most passive fire product conformity standards? Here I am. You have the phone number of Vinayak. He's in Mumbai. You can call him up. We are right here. And we have the classic offering now. Any Indian standards, not any, 10 Indian standards for passive fire protection. We are here to help. Any other questions, please pop them into the Q&A. If you think there are any other questions that I can address, I would be happy to do so.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes to go. So 5:30 was our cutoff time. While we get the question from others, sir, we have the Vice Chairman of National Building Code, very important personality who has been in and out of the construction industry. Everybody in the industry knows about him. He is none other than Mr. V. Suresh. Mr. Suresh, sir, a few comments from you about the standards and code that we have did today program. How do you feel these subjects are more important to construction industry?
Very happy good evening to all the distinguished participants and to Abhishek for the wonderful presentation that's made. Unfortunately, Wadhwa Sahab is not there. He made his opening remarks very relevant. He's convener of those committees over there of standards which have already been mentioned, and especially Defense Department, that contribution is phenomenal. And what Abhishek has really brought on to the whole group is that the importance of various types of standards that can be there, which can be done by a national standard, international standard, plus also foreign standards for different companies, American, British, plus all, including professional bodies, which are there like NFPA, etc. So each has got different levels of applicability in a large way, and how the Indian standards, which are already done through a very comprehensive process of consultation with all the concerned specialists in the particular subject, not only the technologists, the manufacturer, the testing group, the scientists, the R&D group, anybody who can say on that particular subject, they'll all be members of the committee. So all stakeholders are involved in the committee there. And having been in the standardization area right from 1966, that makes it 56 years, by continuous association with all the National Building Code versions of first version of 1970, followed by next version 1983, the third version in 2005, and the latest version 2016. Our standards have come a long way, and codal provisions also has become sharper with the type of new challenges coming in this 55 decades period. The requirements of the codal provisions also undergone phenomenal changes, and I would say to a reasonable degree of present requirement of India's construction in terms of heights of building and different types of mixed use occupancies, as well as the type of technologies that we have. And as rightly indicated by Abhishek, both the passive and active design issues have been very well covered in the National Building Code of India 2016, plus the large number of standards you mentioned. Standards are independent documents, which will be also a basis for some of the codal requirements that have been written over there. It's quite possible there are some provisions in the National Building Code which may not have a standard separately. But the fact of the matter is that normally it will always be backed up, but those that are done by the CED 36 and CED 22 committees of the Bureau of Indian Standards, and the National Building Code is done by the CED 46 committee. I'm very happy that Ashwath is there. He's the one dealing with all the 4 sections of Part 9 dealing with plumbing services on water supply, sanitation, gas supply, and solid waste management. So are we having a separate committee to deal with the fire protection, fire safety, and life safety in the National Building Code, of which has mentioned many times by Abhishek, because they are, and this continues, and these are all dynamic documents. It's not a static document. As and when you see, you go through provisions of a code in a practical application, you find it difficult, or you think that it should be a little more different. Once the comments are made available by any of the users, mind you, and they will always be looked into by the concerned technical committee to see whatever changes to it. Either you can completely change it, or you can make an amendment, or you can bring in a new provision, or an addition can be brought in. So these are things which are already done, and therefore participation by the users are very important. And I'm very happy you mentioned CCPS. I mentioned about the CPWD standard. They're all user departments. And it's very necessary that national standards, only one standards making body at the highest level of government of India is under the Bureau of Indian Standards Act, is the BIS, earlier called the Indian Standards Institution. So whatever codes are, standards are brought by them, normally we should expect that the implementing department like PWD or MES or Defense or Railways, or state government departments like PWD, State Fire and Rescue Services, normally they tend to adopt that. For example, the National Building Code provision Part 4 by itself, it's not mandatory, it's recommendatory, it's a guiding document. But the day the provisions of NBC Part 4 is reflected in the State Fire Protection Act, he indicated which are all the states having those documents, or in the building bylaws of the local bodies, which is under the Municipal Corporation Act, either under a Municipal Corporation Act or a Municipalities Act. These are documents which deal with the day-to-day construction activity, or a separate Fire Services Act, many states have brought in, under which the rules are brought. And in the rules, if they say all shall be in line with Part 4, fire safety and life safety and national building code, just that one line makes a document which is a recommendatory document mandatory the moment that finds a place in the regulatory document of the state. And many states are already, as far as fire and life safety is concerned, by and large, they always use the provisions of the National Building Code as a basis for that. So it's a classic case of a guiding document, a recommendatory document becoming a mandatory document, because the local regulatory framework recognizes that and puts that as the document. Because in the formulation of that particular code, large number of people have participated in the particular thing of not only experts. These documents go into a process of wide circulation for eliciting technical comments on that. Over 3,000, 4,000 people give their comments on and those are all looked into by the committees of the BIS. And as rightly told by Jabra, the consensus approach of finally what should be done in the code is evolved. And that can't be done by a municipal corporation or a state fire service, because they won't have the bandwidth to deal with that particular thing in a national, international level. And therefore, the provisions of the BIS is by and large taken as a very good basis for that. And now with the substantial international consultants coming in the picture, international builders coming in the picture, international technologies coming in the picture, the provisions of the ISO document, provisions of BIS, provision of ASTM, provision of UL testing one, FM testing one, NFPA documents are also increasingly now being used for reference by all consultants. And the BIS itself, it continuously is trying to see how their codes do reflect the latest version on that. For example, when more tall buildings started coming over there, our latest versions really brought out all these things in a very good way, not only what's being done in Singapore or Shanghai or Dubai or the latest version NFPA. And therefore, we try to either adopt or adapt to deal with the local situation that we have, because they've already gone through. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all over. So therefore, those best practices which are there are also utilized. But I think the last point on which I would like to close is the point that Abhishek rightly said, and that's important. Two things of the testing and certification of the large number of products that are required over there. And that's an important, because code will say what fire resistance rating is required, what compartments are to be provided, how do you deal with that, fire stops you provided, but how do you ensure that a product that you're going to use does cover that? And that's where the testing certification is a very, very important area. And I think Abhishek has indicated limited facilities available within India, but how we can avail of the facilities in nearby areas to deal with that particular one. And the last one is the compliance and enforcement related issue. And that's all the important. Compliance will be done by the consultant, by the builders, and the other one, and enforcement will be done by the department concerned, fire department or building regulatory department, etc. And I think it's a wonderful presentation. Abhishek, let me compliment you. The earlier session as well as the present session. Some people missed it because the earlier session they missed that. But I'm sure once you circulate both this document, they'll get a comprehensive view on that. I want to congratulate you and also Wadhwaji for the opening remarks. And thank you, Dominic, for getting such a wonderful, after all 700 people registering and such a good number of people seeing the session, itself shows the type of impact that the program has made. And I would like to stop at this point of time. This is a continuous, we require a phenomenal amount of awareness to be created. And there are a large number of myths on this particular thing. Those myths have to be demolished. And we got to get the real picture on a rational way. People should understand the basis behind each one of the provisions and the background behind that. That's exactly what Abhishek's effort has been through each series of these discussions. And I'm very happy that I could join. I was there throughout the day to hear the whole presentation, and they brought so much value onto the table. Thank you very much.
Sir. As a president of Focus and a supporting organization for this webinar, I want to wish you, thank you very much, sir, for your supporting the webinar. Sure. And you've been supporting as a Focus president. You've been supporting all our initiatives. Thank you very much, sir. Over to Abhishek.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, Suresh ji. Thank you, BSA, for your wonderful remarks and quips towards the end of the session. I hope to all the listeners who are still around and are listening, I hope that the session has been interesting enough for sparking some forward actions, some thoughts, some thinking. While I encouraged everybody to get more and more involved in standardization, because your knowledge, your experiences, your learning will always add to a better standard in our country, in any country in the world. And I just want to share towards the end of this session, before we close, that we as Thomas Bell Wright here in Dubai are very, very excited to see that more and more people in the construction industry in India who feel the need for better compliance are choosing us, are understanding that compliance is important, testing, inspection, and certification. And we are very excited, and hopefully all of you will see a listing to Indian standards for partitions, for fire doors and other products. And it will make your life very, very easy to check that fire safety is correctly getting installed in the buildings you live in the buildings you occupy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We look forward to see you again on 8th April on the third series, that is implementations and maintenance of the fire product, specifically passive fire product. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very much. Good luck to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.